fight is not done!
Welcome back, everyone. It's Charlie. This will be my full X-Men 97 Season 2 Episodes 1, 2, and 3 video. They dropped all 3 episodes on the first day, so we'll just do a single big video for all of them. There are a whole bunch of WTF moments, Easter eggs, references to the comics, so we will break it all down. Congratulations, everybody. You finally made it. We finally have new episodes. They even said Season 3 and Season 4 are on the way, too. Everybody at the same time shouting, "To me, my X-Men," as loud as you possibly can. I will be doing weekly videos for all the episodes. There'll be 9 episodes total instead of 10 like Season 1, so just big reminder about that. If you're brand new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get everything. The title of Episode 1 is Days of Past Future, which is a reference to X-Men Days of Future Past, both from the comics and the original X-Men animated series, which adapted Days of Future Past on the show. In the context of Season 2 now, it's a reference to Bishop and Forge in the 2 time periods, rescuing the X-Men from the past and the future. Generally, this season is meant to be all about Apocalypse's life, messing with his own timeline and trying to bring about the Age of Apocalypse in that distant future from the comics and from the original animated series. During the original series, it was the alternate future from the One Man's Worth episodes. That was the Age of Apocalypse from the comics. There are a couple times in the episodes, mostly in the intros and in the 4,000 years in the future timeline, where we're seeing the Age of Apocalypse. That is the original time period that Bishop comes from, which he references a couple times in the episodes. 5,000 years ago in the past, in ancient Egypt, to see the rise of Apocalypse, the first mutant. There are a lot of arguments about who the actual first mutant is in Marvel Comics because they've retconned it a couple times, but in the universe of the X-Men, the animated series, and X-Men 97, it's Apocalypse. And there's a lot of Doctor Who-style timey-wimey time travel going on this season, particularly with Kang the Conqueror. We'll talk about him in a second because he's in his Rama form in the past timeline right now. Apocalypse messed with time travel all the time on the original animated series. He was last seen in the Axis of Time, but they never confirmed that he died. Now this confirms that he did not, and we saw him in the post-credits scene for Season 1, so you already knew that Season 2 was going to be big Apocalypse season. Jean Grey winds up doing the previously on X-Men this time, and then they changed the Marvel animation intro, adding Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, Marvel Zombies, Eyes of Wakanda, all the new animated series that released since Season 1 aired. They also added some footage from X-Men 97 Season 1 with Gambit riding Wolverine like an ostrich, with the camera zooming in on Gambit's face to remind you that he will be back eventually. The Apocalypse post-credit scene from Season 1 was all about him bringing Gambit back. We got a couple of teasers for that during the X-Force storyline during the 1990s, so I'll talk about that when we get to that part of the episodes. During the regular X-Men intro, it's mostly the same as Season 1, the final intro scenes that we saw in the finale for Season 1, except for some additional moments from those final episodes, like Magneto ripping out Wolverine's Adamantium to remind you Cyclops and Jean Grey Cable fighting together. We get a new scene of Forge and Storm from their episodes in Season 1, then Forge and Bishop looking like they're going to find a way to put Wolverine's Adamantium back in his body. We get a new scene of Cable and a future X-Force roster fighting Apocalypse and his robots in the 2055 Age of Apocalypse timeline from the One Man's Worth episodes from that time period. And we get a scene of the X-Men falling through time to denote the different eras where they get stuck, and they use this in all the intros for the first couple of episodes. One of the cool things they do with the X-Men intros is that they change them heavily based on who the episode is mostly about, but there are a couple scenes that they reuse across all the intros. And you also notice that Gambit is back with the team in this final moment when they run at the Brotherhood of Mutants, at least in this first intro. So they want to remind you about Gambit, even though technically the characters still think that he's dead in present day. Remember, they think that he's dead.
Remember it.
During the opening scene, we've seen it's been months since the end of Season 1. The X-Mansion has sat in ruins this whole time, but Forge and Bishop have been using their gear in the basement to search for them across time, and now they've traveled to Forge's cabin. You notice the woman on the news has traces of Bastion's virus that he gave to the human population that turned them into Sentinels in Season 1, so even though they cured all of humanity, there's still some after effects, like you notice the people that were dosed with the virus. He and Bishop make another time travel device that looks similar to the ones they've used in previous episodes in the original X-Men the Animated Series, with the same wristbands that Forge and Bishop were using during the original animated series, and remind you that he is from the Age of Apocalypse timeline 2055. This is the 1990s present day, starting to turn into that bad future faster and faster. basically setting up the stakes for this season. If they don't stop Apocalypse or stop what's happening right now, they're going to wind up in that terrible Age of Apocalypse future. When they reference the future time period, 4,000 years in the future, they say they're in the Atlantic Basin, meaning that the Atlantic Ocean, probably Earth's other oceans, have all dried up in those 4,000 years. That's how bad things have gotten. When Forge says they haven't even tested the time travel device yet, Forge's power is that he can make anything that he thinks of, but he never knows how it works or how he creates it. It's just like breathing for him. He just randomly can make anything. They both know that Apocalypse is the common denominator in these two different time periods, but it's actually Mother Ascani, aka Rachel Summers, that winds up being the person who secretly pulled the X-Men through the different time periods, trying to stop Apocalypse from rising and trying to help Cable become Cable, help Nathan become Cable. So one of the major questions from Season 1 is answered. What threw the X-Men through time? It was Rachel Summers using the power of the Phoenix Force. Forge goes to the future timeline to save that group because they confirm that's where Storm went and Wolverine and Morph. There were a lot of questions about where they wound up. It turns out they're in the future, they just didn't show them. They just wanted to show you the scene with Cyclops and Jean Grey and Nathan. And Bishop goes to rescue the group in the past. This episode is mostly concerned with that future timeline, and it's adapted from the comic book, The Adventures of Cyclops and the Phoenix, which loosely resemble what they do in the episode. They change some of that quite a bit, but for the most part, it's young Nathan growing up in this time period, and Cyclops winds up encountering him and can't tell him that he is his father, but they do get a lot of moments of being family together, family-like moments, and the older Apocalypse is there, but they changed it because Strife doesn't show up in the episode, and like Strife is a big thing. He's a clone of Cable created by Apocalypse, the older Apocalypse. But a lot of the episode veers into like original territory when we get into the whole time travel Apocalypse storyline at the end of episode 1. But in the comic, young Nathan is also raised by an older Rachel Summers, Cyclops and Jean Grey's daughter from the Days of Future Past alternate timeline. She also becomes the next host of the Phoenix, so the title of that comic book, The Adventures of Cyclops and the Phoenix, is a reference to her. So you do wonder if the X-Men are successful and they prevent this Age of Apocalypse timeline, this distant future from ever happening, if they're going to erase Rachel Summers, this Mother Ascani, the older version, from existence like they did in the comics. Marvel eventually brought Rachel Summers back in the comics. She survived that Days of Future Past timeline. You probably detected she is voiced by Gates McFadden, Beverly Crusher from Star Trek. There were a lot of Star Trek cameos in these first couple of episodes. It was almost like X-Men the Animated Series, just done as Star Trek. There's so many Star Trek actors. And ironically, Patrick Stewart, Captain Picard from The Next Generation, also plays the live-action version of Professor X and is going to be in Avengers Doomsday later this year. Forge encounters Apocalypse's drones, which feel very Terminator adjacent. He gets saved by Wolverine, who's regained his senses and is fighting with the Bone Claws now because no more Adamantium, at least yet. He also has his new suit from the comics. Pretty much everybody this season in the different time periods all gets a glow up. They all get new costumes from later in the comics.
To quote my dear friend, oh my stars and garters.
You also notice Wolverine is not the feral Wolverine that he became in the comics after he lost his adamantium, maybe because they weren't big fans of that run, like the creators of the show weren't big fans and didn't want Wolverine to completely lose his senses. Forge says Beast's catchphrase, "Oh my stars and garters." Storm shows up. She's also wearing one of her future suits from the comics. She's hesitant when he talks about going home to the 90s because of what's happening with Nathan, aka Cable, in the episode. Cyclops and Jean Grey also get new suits from later in the comics. They have the standard conversation about how time travel works in this universe to sort of tee everybody up on what's happening if they aren't like big fans of X-Men or like this is the first X-Men series they've ever watched. Each of the different X-Men teams in the different time periods have the same conversation about the morality of what they're doing. Like, we can't change the timeline. Some of them want to change the timeline, like Magneto is trying to change the timeline to get Apocalypse to turn into a good person. And we see Apocalypse's pyramid base has evolved significantly. His ship has evolved significantly. Dead mutants everywhere, and there are prisoners all over the inside that Apocalypse presumably has been experimenting on because he's been trying to find ways to elongate his life. We get our first look at Ozymandias from the comics. He was the son of the pharaoh who ruled Egypt before Kang the Conqueror came back as Rama and took over. Apocalypse later punishes Ozymandias by turning his body into living stone, which we see here, brainwashing him and forcing him to be his servant for all time, which is why he's still alive like many thousands of years later in the timeline, even though he was born a normal person. And we see his final boss form in the distant future coming out of his regeneration chamber. Notice the celestials and other designs around his chamber here on the walls depicting his own history, like his armor, him in ancient Egypt before the armor. The reason for that is because this was Kang the Conqueror's ship, the celestial thing that he was looking for in the past. Like they say that Kang is looking for this special treasure trove of celestial technology. Presumably, we're going to witness how Apocalypse stole that from Kang the Conqueror and used it to power himself up, create his armor, and took over his celestial ship, and became the Apocalypse that we know from present day. A lot of the celestial designs also look like the ones that we saw during the Eternals movie in live action. I'm assuming that Kevin Feige was responsible for that, like just make it all look like it does in the MCU, like make it look similar to the MCU version of the Celestials. But it's the same sentient ship from the original animated series. Beast speaks to it, it helps them try to stop Apocalypse, and in the X-Men 97 episodes, like episode 1 here, we actually see it basically become Cable's Cortana to make the Halo reference. Cable is Master Chief, and ship is Cortana. Nathan basically becomes Cable and gets all that technology by just taking it from Apocalypse, who took it from Kang. So it's also one of the ways that he's able to time travel without needing the special wristbands too. They then set up the idea that Cable is supposed to become Apocalypse's new fresh vessel in a fresh new body, which is also something from the comics. They introduce his final 4 horsemen, who are based on the comic book versions, is Pestilence, Ichusum. She's from Edo period ancient Japan and spawns millions of beetles from her mouth, which consume everything. War is Decimus Furious, who is a mutant from ancient Rome, and a successful strike from his act will infect his victim with a cold thirst for war, causing that victim to attack everybody around him. Famine is Jeb Lee here. He was a Confederate war soldier. When he bangs his drum, it destroys the flesh of anyone who hears it. And Death is Sanjar Javid, who was from ancient Persia and can just give other people any disease that he wants. Throughout the episode, Jean Grey and Cyclops help Cable learn to use his powers, telepathy and telekinesis, teaching him to use the powers to slow the techno-organic virus in his body, which he does in present day. Like it's a constant thing. If he stops using his powers to stop the flow of the virus, it will completely take him over. It would have done a long time ago. They wind up waiting till the end of the episode to tell him who they really are. We're your parents, but they kind of play at it throughout most of the episode where they almost tell him a couple times.
But you are perfect, my son. Know that in our time here, we thought about you endlessly.
And even though they set up the idea that it's his destiny to grow up without them in the distant future, like he's supposed to be this way, they do get a lot of moments in the episode where they get to be parents to him. So they get a lot of family moments. Ironically, we also get a lot of moments like this with Mother Ascani, who is also their daughter from another timeline, Rachel Summers. This is also why when they introduce Mother Ascani in the episode, they show you her burning through fire, like the imagery, to make it seem like the power of the Phoenix Force, because she is the current host of the Phoenix after her mother, Jean Grey. She tells them about the prophecy of Cable being the one to permakill Apocalypse eventually, like he has to become Cable first, and then eventually at some point their timelines will loop back around, and by the end of things, he will have finally permakilled Apocalypse. Probably the best way that I can explain this really twisty, timey-wimey Doctor Who style time travel is a little bit like River Song's story in Doctor Who, where like her timeline goes in a different direction from like all the other characters. That's kind of like Cable. Them teaming up in the future is meant to be a parallel for them teaming up during season 1 with the older version of Cable, like them teaming up as a family in 2 different time periods. When they travel to Rachel's base, it's a downed S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier, and I actually think that it's meant to be the same S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier that X-Factor is piloting in present day when it's like shiny and new. They confirm what we all thought, that Apocalypse's ship, the sentient ship from the original animated series, the one that he has now, is Kang's ship. It's a celestial ship built by the Celestials. That's why it's so advanced. It is the thing that Kang wants in ancient Egypt that he's trying to unearth. Like he has some celestial tech, but he doesn't have the sentient ship yet. They then repair the helicarrier. The power that they seek winds up being the supernova that Storm winds up using as a celestial storm, and Rachel using the Phoenix Force to start levitating the helicarrier. When she explains why she pulled the different X-Men teams through the timeline, you see the Phoenix Force glowing in her eyes, and we get to see Storm go full Omega level with the Cosmic Storm. The whole idea with Omega level mutants is there's no actual hard limit on where their powers stop. They just keep scaling up at infinite, like there's more and more powerful things. So Rachel basically has to give Storm an explainer, like a tutorial in how her powers really do work. Like, no, you can actually do way more powerful things. And one of the funny things is that Rachel's whole plan here to change Apocalypse's timeline in the past is basically what Apocalypse himself winds up doing from the distant future here. Like, well, if the X-Men are going to mess with my timeline, I'm going to mess with my timeline too. You also notice on the train, Apocalypse is using the same inhibitor collars that they use in the distant past. Like, all these years, the inhibitor collars have not changed. But you notice because of the techno-organic virus, Cable is still able to use his powers a little and is able to escape, and they reveal that they are his mother and father. Technically, it's Madeline Pryor and she was a clone of Jean Grey, but you get the idea. During Season 1, Cable also references this like, you're not my real mother died, because my real mother is Madeline Pryor. So Cable does know the truth about his actual origin, who his actual mother and father are. They give him a very fatherly, motherly pep talk where he uses his powers as he starts to slowly turn into Cable over the course of the rest of the episode. We get a really cool X-Men team up with this future team taking down the final 4 horsemen. Morph also turns into Thor. We'll see who else he turns into this season. He's like a cameo machine. We also saw him turning into Deadpool in the trailer, so at least he will also turn into Deadpool, but probably many other characters too. Nathan using the giant gun here on the train is also a wink at his future self, Cable, using really large guns all the time.
Our mission is complete, but Nathan's is not.
The only thing with this episode in particular is I did think it was weird that Rachel Summers wasn't trying to use the Phoenix Force to just wipe Apocalypse because the Phoenix Force is so powerful. Maybe she already tried and failed for some reason because of the celestial tech. We will see if they ever explain that. Just seems weird if you're one of the most powerful beings in the entire multiverse that you don't try to wipe Apocalypse. And basically, Apocalypse's contingency plan for the X-Men's attack here is to also travel through time back to the 90s, where he says the X-Men are at their weakest. Also because 90s nostalgia, hey, remember the 90s? I was just in the 90s during the animated series, giving you all kinds of problems. They reference a lot of the Apocalypse episodes from the original animated series in the first couple of episodes. Like, hey, remember all those episodes with Apocalypse? Yeah, okay, we're going to give you a quick PowerPoint on those. They then task Nathan with becoming the leader in this future, basically becoming Cable, as he ages into that character before he starts coming back into the past. Like I said, his timeline works more like River Song's timeline on Doctor Who. But I did love the way they clarify here that he uses Apocalypse's celestial tech to become Cable, essentially, greeted by Ship herself, Ship basically becoming his Cortana to his Master Chief, to make the Halo reference. We then flash back to the 90s. Technically it's his future, but it's back to the past as he remembers those events with everyone else, and remembers more of it later in the episodes too. He then starts to develop his own next plan to stop Apocalypse in the 90s, and when he says the bastard finds new ages to crawl out of all the time, that's another Age of Apocalypse reference, and he assembles Psylocke and Archangel for his new X-Force team, because episode 2 is basically like the big X-Force episode. Episode 2's title was A Force to be Reckoned With, which is a reference to the catchphrase of X-Force number 1 in the comics. The Team X-Force Cable puts together in this episode. That comic book is like one of the highest selling comics of all time, next to like X-Men number 1 from the 90s. Whole lot of stuff in the 90s sold real big numbers because of all the covers. If you're around during that period and you also collected a lot of those different covers, raise your hand. I know I definitely had a couple of them. Really easy way for a comic book to sell more copies, just slap a different cover on it. Cable does the previously on X-Men this time because it's basically his episode, putting his X-Force team together, and the episode starts in the present day of the 90s with a group of mutant kids seeking refuge at the X-Mansion, but then captured by X-Factor, because it's also a big X-Factor episode too. There are a lot of jokes at X-Factor's expense. I believe this group of kids are Kid Omega, Chamber, Sync, Prodigy, and Lightbright, but there are a lot of younger mutants that they introduce on the X-Factor helicarrier. They get captured at the X-Mansion by Multiple Man and taken to the helicarrier, who we see later. On the news, they mention Val Cooper, who is now running X-Factor because it's a government-sponsored team. Jubilee and Sunspot hang out at the arcade because it's the 90s, there are arcades everywhere. There's still arcades in present day, but not nearly as many. They both get new suits. She's wearing the black one from when she was a vampire in the comics, but she's not going to be a vampire on the show. They're just using the costume from that run. Cable appears to recruit Jubilee because she's one of the last people to see Apocalypse alive, which is a reference to the events of the X-Men, the animated series, the classic series. And they find one of Apocalypse's former 4 horsemen from the original animated series, War, and they're going to try and find out what Apocalypse is doing from him. All of his files here are references to the Apocalypse episodes from the original animated series, and because they're going after one of the Four Horsemen, there are a lot of references to the Four Horsemen, also I think to foreshadow the idea that Apocalypse is going to create new Four Horsemen during this time period, which is where I think the Gambit comes back. They reintroduce War from the original animated series, his original Four Horsemen on the animated series. Archangel was one of them, which is why he was recruited to X-Force. While this whole meeting is going on, they have a lot of funny moments. It's very subtle, but like funny moments of Cable just enjoying his shake, being a little kid like a very big kid, because he never got to have shakes when he was a little kid growing up, so he actually enjoys doing stuff like this. And even though it seems kind of silly, because he's so massive in the booth there.
Just turn on the news.
And they wind up doing the coolest spin on an X-Force intro for the X-Men animated series intro. Like, it's a great way to change the intro. I wish they would do stuff like this more often. All the scenes are for the X-Force characters and fights that they get into, and involving stuff that they're doing behind the scenes too, just to show you some time jump, like, oh, they're training the background, stuff is happening, just X-Force being X-Force, getting into fights. They slip in a couple scenes of X-Factor because they're such a big part of this episode, and at the end they run at Apocalypse and his Four Horsemen from the original animated series. When they go looking for War in Rio de Janeiro, the parade feels like a big Satoshi Kon Paprika reference. We get a really cool team-up scene where everybody uses their powers together to take War down. They also spend a lot of time showing you Psylocke's powers because they haven't used her a lot during Season 1. They do make the reference that this is kind of a reunion for Archangel with War because they were both on the Four Horsemen team during the animated series. And when Psylocke tries to read his mind, they get a little bit of Apocalypse, but he has mental defenses, and the Wall of Diamonds is meant to be a reference to Emma Frost, leading them to her because she had dealings with him on a business level. They start to argue the morality of killing War, which Archangel does because he and Cable are way more hardcore than the X-Men, which also sets up their collision course with X-Factor later in the episode. It's the whole reason why X-Factor comes for them, because they're killing. And I love the way they introduce Emma Frost on the show. Very Emma Frost kind of vibes. Threatens to control Cable's mind and make him bark like a dog while she uses him for dominatrix fun times. The funny thing about that is that they've done stuff like that in the X-Men comics, and most of the people that she did that to actually enjoyed it. Turns out a lot of the X-Men are degenerates just like everybody else. Don't worry, we will not kink shame. Most people would love to be stepped on by Emma Frost. They then go to the base in the far north, finding way more advanced tech than anything Apocalypse had back during the animated series when he created his original Four Horsemen, making it seem like whatever he does to create his Four Horsemen in present day now will be way more hardcore. Emma Frost then reveals that she double-crossed them, selling them out to X-Factor in exchange for amnesty for her previous crimes because she was a criminal. She's part of the Hellfire Club. And they introduce their current X-Factor roster. It's Havoc, who's one of Cyclops' brothers, Multiple Man, Polaris, Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver's sister, one of Magneto's other children. We'll see if they reference that this season. Strong Guy, guess what his powers are? Wolfsbane, and Valerie Cooper is running the team. They wind up capturing Jubilee, but the rest of the team gets away. And the funny thing is that Cable tells the others, don't worry, Jubilee will be fine, which she is, and which she references later. Like, see, I'm fine, it'd be great. Jubilee clowns on X-Factor a lot during this scene, and they do it later throughout the rest of the episode too. She says that they're C-list knockoff team and knockoff Cyclops because they're one of the many tertiary X-Men side teams, and Havoc is Cyclops' younger brother, who is way less popular in the comics, and discovers a ton of other mutants that they have locked up so far. The kids from the beginning of the episode, this one is Dust, they have the Stepford Cuckoos, the last one she sees is actually Maggie from the Alex Ross run on the cover with Angel. And right after, Cable also makes fun of X-Factor, calling them mall cops. Jubilee used to be a very big fan of the mall until X-Men 97 Season 1 too. When they reference Apocalypse's Frankenstein machine, he probably took it to create his new Four Horsemen, like I said. Basically like the gears that he uses to create more horsemen. This is probably how we get Gambit back. Now the question is going to be, who will the other 3 horsemen be? Polaris then frees Jubilee, feeling sorry for her and wanting to help the X-Men. She'll probably also help them later in the season too. There are a lot of trailer scenes of her teaming up with the other X-Men characters. Like, we'll see way more Polaris this season. Jubilee gets her own hallway fight scene with 90s music. Daredevil would be proud.
I'm a really good lawyer.
They wind up saving all the mutants that X-Factor had captured, but now they're on the government shit list, so X-Force is now on everybody's list. Couple other interesting things during this whole fight sequence too. You notice that Jubilee has rollerblades built into her boots. By the end of this though, Cable also seems like he's a much bigger fan of Jubilee just in general. Season 1 and Season 2 have gone a long way to try and make Jubilee seem like a way cooler character. Cable then remembers what happened after he bonded with Ship in the distant future in the celestial technology, gets his Cortana, Ship becomes his Cortana, and tells him that the X-Men has to return to the 90s immediately for the timeline to stay intact. Interestingly, Rachel Summers does not tell them who she really is. Maybe they're saving that for later this season. We'll see if they ever pay that off, because they definitely implied it heavily a couple different times. Like, oh, she has the Phoenix Force. Oh, she's taking care because she loves Cable. Why does she love him so much? Because she is also part of this family. But the irony is not lost on her, because she's kind of going through the same thing too, where she can't be with them the way that Nathan wants to be with them, like a normal family. Like, no, we can't do that. The timeline doesn't work that way. They then show you how Cable is able to time travel with Ship's celestial tech, sending them back at will. This is also why he doesn't need the time bands like Forge and Bishop need. We then get to episode 3, titled The Rise of Apocalypse, which is a reference to the comic book, also titled The Rise of Apocalypse, which is basically what you see play out in this episode with some changes. For the most part, it just shows him being born in Sabbah and then turning into the Apocalypse character eventually. Most of the characters that appear in that comic book are featured in this episode. Interestingly, this episode and episode 4 are a two-parter. They did two-part episodes all the time during the original animated series. Magneto does the previously on X-Men this time because we finally go back to ancient Egypt to see what's happening with that team of X-Men and the younger Apocalypse. They then changed the intro back this time to feature scenes from season 1 of this particular team of X-Men in the past, but when we actually start the episode again, we see the future team returned back to the X-Mansion in the 90s and to set up Bishop's mission to the past, that they're supposed to meet here, but that team hasn't made it back yet, their bands aren't transmitting, so they're kind of stuck in the past for the most part. Their solution eventually in the past is to get Kang the Conqueror to help them. Like, oh, this time traveler, who they don't know is Kang yet, was able to time travel. Maybe we can use his technology to go back. We go back to ancient Egypt and we see Kang's spherical base. It's celestial tech. He uses celestial tech, but it's not the same ship technology that we see Apocalypse eventually take over, the sentient ship. That's what he's looking for. He still needs that to become a full-on god-level character that he wants to become. All of Kang's storyline in this episode is based on old-school Fantastic Four comics when they first introduced the Kang character. When he debuted, he was just called Rama Tut and set himself up as a pharaoh coming from the distant future in a Sphinx ship, which we also see in the episode. During that story, what happened is that Reed Richards and the Fantastic Four learn what Rama Tut has done, go back into the past to stop him, and he sets up Apocalypse as his successor, then goes into the future, escapes into the future, and styles himself Kang the Conqueror, then comes back to the past even more and tries to fight the Avengers several different times. So Kang's story in the episode is meant to be similar to Apocalypse's episode. We're seeing the rise of these two big Marvel characters at different points early in their careers. Sabbah eventually rises to become Apocalypse, and Rama Tut eventually rises to become Kang the Conqueror. The live-action MCU movies introduced Jonathan Majors as multiple versions of Kang the Conqueror, playing every single version, and he did a Rama Tut version, but the way they spun it, it was just him from a different universe. In the episode, Rama Tut also winds up being our next big Star Trek cameo. He's voiced by John Delancey, Q from Star Trek The Next Generation. So like I said, a lot of Star Trek actors. One of the other real big ones was Michael Dorn, Worf from The Next Generation, who voices Ball, who was the leader of Clan Aqaba, who is the person who found Apocalypse when he was a baby and raised him in this really hardcore way, survival of the fittest. So that's where he got the idea for survival of the fittest, from this Ball character.
You were just a broken child when I found you in the desert.
We get a lot of time travel references from Rama Tut Kang, who basically says that Apocalypse was only a matter of time. Like, well, you were going to show up no matter what, eventually. He is from the future, so like he knew that Apocalypse existed during this time period, so it was only a matter of time before they ran into each other. But he does not care about Apocalypse at all. He just wants the celestial ship. Also him making a matter of time references. A Matter of Time is also the name of a Star Trek Next Generation episode, and he himself is a time traveler. You also notice that his celestial tech that he's already using from the distant future looks similar to the design language in the Eternals movie in the live-action MCU movies. Magneto and Professor X then reveal that they know all about Apocalypse during this time period, but they don't know who Kang the Conqueror is, thinking that he might be able to help them get back home. Kang does not care about them at all, like would not lift a finger to help them. Magneto then says damn the timeline and tries to call an audible saying that they can turn Apocalypse into a good person, or less evil at least, which is foolish, but maybe save the future by changing the past. Keep in mind that the rules for time travel, the way that time travel works in the X-Men the Animated Series universe, is different from the live-action MCU movies, so this is a big change. So when you're thinking about how time travel works, just depending on what show you're on or what movie you're in, it works differently. In the animated universe, you can change the past to affect your future. Apocalypse then says his catchphrase, survival of the fittest, as they attack Kang's ship, and he literally stops a giant elephant dead in its tracks and throws it like a sack of potatoes just to show you how powerful he is even before he gets his hands on any celestial technology. We get a real quick foreshadowing flash in the dust of future Apocalypse, making you wonder if he's already come back to the past, because remember, older Apocalypse jumped into the time stream and is messing with his own timeline too, while the X-Men are trying to mess with the timeline on their side of things. So there are a lot of different characters that are traveling through time for different reasons trying to mess with the timeline. Apocalypse winds up staying his hand when he looks at Magneto, making you think there might be a chance that Magneto could be successful in turning Apocalypse good, all the way to the end of the episode, but right at the end they're like, nope, definitely not going to happen. He's definitely still going to become the Apocalypse that you know and hate. It would have been way too easy if they could have just fixed Apocalypse in the past. There's no way that was ever going to happen. There's another funny moment of Beast complaining about the new time travel device they're trying to make with Kang's robots, and it's not working because the robots are somehow from the future, but very old-timey, and that's because of the way that Kang the Conqueror works. He jumps all over the time stream, just stealing stuff left and right. And the stuff that he stole, these robots, were from a museum in the distant future, which is why they're technically old technology, even though they are from the future. The whole reason why Kang was able to travel back into the past and become Rama Tut in the first place was because he stole time travel technology of Dr. Doom's from a museum in the distant future. We get a lot of scenes of this younger Apocalypse trying to humanize him more, and he does seem like he could turn out to be a decent person if he had the right person trying to influence him, but Ball just seems like he wants him to be the most hardcore thing on planet Earth, conquer the planet. Also love the reference from Professor X and Magneto where Magneto says he couldn't just be the first mutant, he could also be the first X-Man. Imagine Apocalypse being on a team of X-Men. They actually wound up doing that not too long ago with another version of Apocalypse as a boy who winds up being good and joining the X-Men. They wind up having a lot of conversations about consent because they want Professor X to just use his powers to rip all this information about the Celestials and Kang out of this guy's mind. The General then reveals he was the person who killed Apocalypse's mother and then enslaved him for the first time before Ball rescued him as a child.
Never forget the disfigured face of Rama Tut's favorite slave.
Generally, the rest of Apocalypse's storyline in this episode is him just slowly encountering things that make him madder and madder and madder until he just finally goes back into his classic mode in just old school Apocalypse. When Professor X goes inside Logos' mind, the pyramids are just references to Apocalypse's pyramid base and the regular pyramids because they're in ancient Egypt right now. When he sees the broken moon, though, with Magneto's helmet, that feels like an Onslaught reference. Onslaught is the psionic entity created from the minds of Professor X and Magneto, so we'll see if Onslaught shows up on the show in future episodes. The hourglass in the sand is meant to be a reference to the sands of time and all the time traveling this season, and we hear Apocalypse's voice. I think that's the voice that we're hearing. I am the tide that carries all to the rock of the eternal shore, crash against them and be broken, because that was a quote that he had in the very first episode of the original animated series where they introduced the character. So the crazy entity that Professor X is afraid of, but they're not sure what it is, I think that's the older version of Apocalypse that's coming back into the past, messing with his own timeline. That's the person they're talking about where he says he is where the end begins. It's Apocalypse. It's always Apocalypse. Ball then reveals the X-Men's truth to Apocalypse, who kills Logos and veers back into classic Apocalypse territory. Everything goes tits up as Bishop shows up and Kang unleashes a giant blast of energy on their location, trying to kill Apocalypse, ending in a cliffhanger. So very clearly, there's so much Apocalypse this season, there's no way that is going to stick. But I do love the classic X-Men episode cliffhangers. It's just like the original animated series cliffhangers. Everybody post all your reactions in the comments below and let me know if you spotted any big Easter eggs or references in the episodes that I didn't talk about in the video. My full episode 4 video will post next week after they release it, so be sure to enable alerts for my channel so you don't miss that. They might release a trailer for some of the episodes. We'll see. There'll be a halfway through trailer, so I'll do videos for all that stuff that they release too. Everybody click here for that new episode. I'll update the link as soon as I post it, and click here for all my other X-Men 97 episodes. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.